The PR group, okay, this is our pontine, meaning it's in the ponds. All right? The pontine group will help to modify the rhythm. Why am I so concerned about the rhythm of my breathing? We want it to stay constant, and we want it to stay equal on each side. I mean, I'm sure that it's probably happened, okay, where one side is working, the other one's isn't. Think of a collapsed lung, okay? But the rhythm of breathing, when I said that it's going to start an entire cascade of events, what other systems did I mention that respiration affects? Will affect the skeletal muscles, the heart, the kidneys, the cardiac, the vascular, the vessels, the brain, the digestive, well, that would be the kidneys. Am I missing anything?
Did we say endocrine?
What about endocrine?
I don't think so, because that would be affected by well, I guess that could come by way of the external force that we do, like if we begin to exercise, and therefore the release of the norepi and the epi. So that would be, I guess, us affecting it. But then again, in certain situations where respiration is going to be affected, it will affect those hormones too. So yeah, so the endocrine system. What else am I missing? I have to think about the lymph system. So the events, they become an entire cascade of what happens from this system. So one of the things that becomes important is identification of when to affect breathing. All right? Identifying when breathing needs to be modified. So, let me see here. Do you see this right here? Chemoreceptors. Have we had that term before? What does that mean? A receptor for a chemical. What kind of chemicals? Huh? What?
Our carbon dioxide.
Our carbon dioxide. Our oxygen level.
Does hydrogen play?
The H pluses. Let me think here for a second. CO2, O2, H plus. Whoa. What am I dealing with there?
Elements.
What kind of scale? pH. Wait a minute. Let me think about this for a second. pH tells me what? acidic or basic, okay? Can we allow the pH of the body to go out of range? No, we cannot. The body needs to maintain the pH range very closely. The biggest determining factor for that, CO2. Why?
Yes, they can bond with the hydrogen to form acids.
They are going to have the ability to affect this pH because of the fact, just a minute ago, I mentioned CO2 and O2, one of these was more dissolvable in water. Which one? CO2. If CO2 dissolves in water, what does that form?
H3O.
Carbonic acid. And that's an acid that would be in the fluids that would affect my pH. So we have to make sure that we maintain it. So what we're going to find, we're going to have central chemoreceptors. They're located in chemosensitive areas of the medulla oblongata. They're going to have a direct connection to the respiratory center. We're going to find on the periphery of the body chemoreceptors. Carotid and aortic bodies are where these are going to be found. They're going to have a connection to the respiratory center by cranial nerves 9 and 10. Remember good old vagus nerve? Okay. The respiratory system plays a major role in maintaining the blood's oxygen and CO2 and pH levels. The respiratory system is huge for doing that. We want all of that to be held within normal limits. Now, the way that the respiratory system is going to do that is the respiratory system will either increase your breathing rate or decrease the breathing rate. So it will actually affect that rate. Any deviation whatsoever in any of these three levels, the oxygen level, the CO2 level, the pH, is going to markedly affect the respiratory system. So the respiratory system will want to bring the levels back into an acceptable pH range. The chemoreceptors, they can respond. Now listen to this. They can respond to H pluses or the partial pressures of oxygen. Or both. Wait a minute. What did I just say was the biggest determining factor?
CO2.
But my chemoreceptors respond to H pluses, my partial pressures of oxygen, or both. I didn't mention anything about CO2. what makes the H plus, or the partial pressures of oxygen, go out of range? CO2. So, if blood pH drops, so if your pH should be roughly 7.45 in the blood, and we begin to see it move to 7.37, what's going to happen to your respiration rate? Increase or decrease? Your respiration rate's going to increase. Because if I can increase my respiration rate, I'm going to move more CO2 to the lung tissue and breathe it out. And if I breathe out the CO2, my pH is going to be brought back to normal limits. Does that make sense? How about if my blood pH goes from, say, that 7.47 to 7.5? What's good? Your respiration rate will decrease because we need to keep some of that CO2. If we keep some of that CO2, we'll bring the pH back into the normal range. Does that make sense?
What happens to the organs when your pH is more basic?
When the pH is more basic, the organs can withstand that, just so long as it's not going to be something that's prolonged. If it becomes a prolonged problem, the first thing that's probably going to happen is something's going to go wrong with your respiratory system, and hopefully they'll identify it and get you, either get you on oxygen or take you off oxygen. So what will happen is it'll affect that system first before it begins to affect the other organs. The hope, and the reason for that is when we think about the blood supply to the tissues, the blood supply to the tissues is not going to be the same all the time. So it wouldn't affect all the tissues of the body. Because the system, one thing about blood supply, we don't have blood supply to every single tissue of the body 24/7. We don't have that much blood in our bodies. Okay, so it actually gets shunted to the areas of the body that are going to need it. And the body can, because you remember how at that capillary level, capillary beds, there was smooth muscle, and it could constrict or dilate and allow for the blood flow, or to make the blood flow go past it. That's one of the ways that we're controlling this blood flow. Now, something else that will begin to affect the breathing, the ability of the stretch.